In 1828, a 19-year-old young villager visited the city of New Orleans for the first time in his life. It was his first experience of seeing such a big city. The magnificent buildings and large ships on the docks impressed him. But then he observed something that remained in his memory forever. He saw that human beings were being bought and sold in the city market like commodities. Helpless human beings in chains were being dragged from ships and taken to market. Paper advertisements about the auctions of slaves were pasted on walls. These advertisements announced that buyers should bring cash because slaves were not available on credit. Ironically, all slaves were black. The whites in America enslaved their fellow black countrymen. The young villager noticed the cruelty. This practice had hurt him, but he was in no position to help the slaves. The young villager was just an employee on a small boat. Yet he told his friend that someday he would stop this evil trade. But this mission was not an easy one. He needed to become the most powerful man in America to accomplish his mission. And look, it happened. Who was Abraham Lincoln? This is the Sangamon River, and this is the beautiful small town of New Salem on its banks. This is the place where Abraham Lincoln spent the first 6 years of his youth. Here he experienced some of the great failures of his life. But he was not a successful man even before coming to the town. When he was only 9, his mother died of a poisonous herb in milk. Then his father brought her stepmother. Abraham had good relations with his stepmother, but he didn't like his father. His father also used to mock and beat him. He never got a formal education but learned to read and write. He memorized parts of the Bible and Shakespeare's poetry. But he never fully understood mathematics. He was not even a beautiful person. There were strangely unwanted cuts on his face. He could not speak English well. His accent was awkward. Only his height was a plus point for his personality. He was 6 feet, 4 inches tall. He was also a gifted speaker. So friends, this wooden cabin you see in New Salem is where Abraham Lincoln started his career as a storekeeper. Around 100 people lived in the town. They all became his customers. Sometimes, travelers also visited his shop and bought things. The store sold candles, small bottles of wine, and some utensils. But the time was against Lincoln. He soon lost his job. Because the store owner closed the store due to financial losses and fired Lincoln. This was his first failure. Even after losing his job, Lincoln achieved something very precious. The locals considered him an honest man. One day, a woman bought something from his shop. When she left, Lincoln noticed that his scales were not right. He had not weighed the material properly. So he went to the woman's house and gave her some more things. The people of New Salem called Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, because of his honesty. Because of this reputation, Lincoln decided to run in the 1832 state election. He was sure that the people of New Salem and other nearby settlements would vote for him and that he would become a member of the Illinois State Assembly. But it so happened that he lost, despite his good reputation. This was his second failure. Since he was 6 feet 4 inches tall, he had enough space on his chest for more badges of failure. The 23-year-old Lincoln had no money or enough food after losing his first election. He used his power to make a living and began to work as a logger. He later became a postman and began delivering letters to people's homes. He also worked as a part-time surveyor. But even this job did not suit his needs and temperament. He then took advantage of his excellent physique and challenged the New Salem wrestling champion. But even here, he lost. Some say he lost deliberately to win the sympathy of the wrestling champion and his friends. And he succeeded this time. The wrestling champion, Armstrong, and his friends became Lincoln's close friends. They helped him in his future political struggle. He opened the Berry Lincoln store with a friend, William Berry, to earn a living. Once, his financial concerns were over, he restarted his political career. He became a member of the Illinois legislature in 1834. This was his first success in a life full of failures. But this success did not solve his financial problems. He received only a daily allowance of $3 during assembly sessions. He could not manage his store because of politics. 1835 proved to be a painful year in his life. First, his store partner, William Berry, died, and then the store was shut down. The store had a debt of $1,800. It took Lincoln 15 years to repay the loan. Lincoln jokingly called it the national debt. But the greatest tragedy of all was the death of Anne Rutledge. Lincoln had met Anne in his New Salem store. She was so beautiful that he fell in love with her. But the girl was engaged to someone else. Psychologists believe that once you fall in love with someone, you can easily return to them. Both lovers spent a lot of time together. They often met outside the store and even on the banks of the river. But all of a sudden, typhoid fever spread in the area. Senator N. Rutledge died of the fever. This memorial board hangs at the place where Anne lived in a cabin. Lincoln met her for the last time in the same cabin. It is also written on the board that Lincoln wept under a banyan tree near the cabin. Lincoln had tasted 3 failures in a single year. His last failure was the most tragic of all. For as long as he lived, Lincoln visited Anne's grave several times. 2 years after the deaths of Anne and Barry, Lincoln moved to the nearby town of Springfield. New Salem was already losing its population. The town was established as a temporary stop for the steamboats from the Sangamon River. But the Sangamon River was never cleaned for the steamboats. So the town disappeared within 3 years of Lincoln's departure. Lincoln never returned to New Salem. But he visited the grave of his beloved sometimes. Lincoln became a lawyer in Springfield. He earned good money and paid his debts. He also married Mary Todd, a girl from a noble family. He also became a member of the U.S. Congress and spent 2 years in Washington, D.C., but all of this soon lost its appeal. Because he could not forget the slaves he saw at the beginning of his life who were being sold in chains. He disliked slavery, but his party, the Whig Party, and the people of his constituency supported slavery. So he quit politics and only focused on his law career. When he was free, he spent time with his wife and children, but he almost forgot about his father and stepmother. Abraham Lincoln rose to fame because of the debate in America. This debate was about the issue of slavery. The American nation was divided over this issue. The southern states of the country supported slavery. The southern farmers needed slaves for their fields and farms. In return, slaves were given permanent housing and food. These slaves had no rights. The southern states didn't want to abolish slavery because slaves were cheaper labor. But the northern states were experiencing an industrial revolution. Industries provided jobs for the white people and made them less dependent upon agriculture. Slaves were not suitable for the industry. The white people didn't want the slaves to take away their jobs. So it was a moral as well as an economic problem that motivated the whites in the northern states to abolish slavery. In the 1850s, the issue of slavery became a hot topic in both the southern and northern states. This hot debate soon led to bloodshed, and a civil war erupted in the country. Both proponents and opponents of slavery took up arms. Both sides used references from the Bible to justify their cause. Now Lincoln has also set aside his legal files and rejoined politics. One day, he heard Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas's speech. Senator Douglas was speaking in favor of maintaining slavery. He did not consider blacks to be equal to whites. He was saying that every American state had the right to decide the future of slavery. When Stephen Douglas finished his speech, Lincoln stepped forward. He said he would prove the next day that Douglas was wrong. People in Springfield knew Lincoln, so they came to hear the speech the next day. Lincoln spoke for 3 hours, arguing against slavery. He said that Douglas could only be right if we didn't consider blacks to be human beings. He said that if the blacks were humans, then no one had the right to keep them as slaves. He declared that blacks were human beings and free. Lincoln's arguments touched the hearts of many. Soon, his name was popular among the abolitionists. Abraham Lincoln's old Whig Party was dissolved soon. The Republican Party replaced it, which was an anti-slavery party. Lincoln also joined the new party. In 1858, he tried to become a senator as a Republican candidate. His rival, Stephen Douglas, was also running for the same seat. Lincoln decided to hold public debates with his opponents. So he challenged Douglas to a debate. Douglas accepted the challenge. Lincoln and Douglas had 7 public debates of 3 hours each in various cities in Illinois. A fat Douglas, with a height of 5 feet 4 inches, was facing Lincoln, who was 6 feet 4 inches tall. When the two came face to face, people could not help but smile at the difference in their heights. People started calling Douglas the Little Giant and Lincoln the Long Abbey. Thousands of people saw these debates, and street vendors earned a lot of money by selling their name badges. As the people flocked to see these debates, another revolution was also taking place. This was the revolution of print media. The telegraph system was installed by that time. This system sent messages faster than trains. Reporters sent their typed news reports to their newspaper offices via telegraph. This news was then printed and distributed across America by train. Reporters also used cameras to take pictures of their newspapers. It was an innovation in media. The print media spread Lincoln's message against slavery across the United States. Supporters of Lincoln and Douglas studied those reports and used them in their political debates. Abraham Lincoln lost to Douglas in the Senate elections. But despite the defeat, his name was now a symbol against black slavery. He had become so popular that his name was sometimes mentioned as a U.S. presidential candidate. Lincoln had recently been defeated in the Senate elections, so he didn't imagine becoming a presidential candidate. Yet his state, Illinois, declared him its presidential candidate. But the final decision on the presidential candidate was to be made at the National Convention in Chicago. The Republican Party was new. So it needed a powerful candidate to win the elections. The party had lost the previous elections. But now they want to win. Delegates in the National Convention discussed many names, including Lincoln. No one opposed Lincoln. Thus, a failed businessman, a failed lover, and a failed Senate candidate were nominated for the U.S. presidential elections. Abraham Lincoln was not present at the convention. He was playing handball at his home in Springfield. When he was declared the presidential candidate, people gathered outside his home and cheered. The Republican nomination was like winning the election. Because the Democrats were unable to field a single agreed-upon candidate, the Democrats could not choose between Stephen Douglas and John Breckinridge. So both candidates participated in the elections. This broke the unity of the Democrats and greatly benefited Lincoln. Elections were held on November 6, 1860. Voting was taking place all over the United States, but interestingly, the Southern states did not have the slightest support for Lincoln. Even though his name did not appear on the ballot papers, nevertheless, when the result was announced, Lincoln had won. Interestingly, his votes were 300,000 fewer than the combined votes of the two Democratic candidates. But obviously, they were divided. Lincoln won 180 electoral votes from 18 states. Thus, Lincoln became president, but his success divided his country into two. The Southern states broke away from America after Lincoln's victory. They created their own country and named it the Confederate States of America. The new country had its own flag and parliament. Senator Davis was elected as its president. Lincoln had to face the biggest crisis in American history. But his first challenge was his oath-taking ceremony. He had to travel 1,654 miles from Springfield to Washington, D.C., but along the 1,500-mile route, thousands of his opponents were waiting for him. He threatened to assassinate Lincoln if he did not resign and come to Washington to take the oath. At that time, there were no airplanes to carry him safely to Washington. He had to travel by train, and this route was not safe. What happened then? How did Lincoln reach Washington? Did Abraham Lincoln live up to his promise to abolish slavery? Or did political problems hinder him? Why was the media against him? Why did Lincoln fire so many generals, including his army chief? What was the decision that made Abraham Lincoln one of the greatest leaders in history? Will I show you all this in the next episode of this series?